Hello, everyone. Welcome. So before we start, for the people tuning in on GoToMeeting, please be sure that everything is muted, both the sound and the video. And also that please use the chat box to communicate and ask questions. But please make sure that you're sending the message only to the organizer. Okay, so we have our Rosemary Carolan here. Rosemary Carolan, she earned her BS in elementary education from Chestnut Hill College and an EDM in urban education from Temple University. She taught the middle grades in elementary schools for several years before becoming a sales director with Mary Kay Incorporation. In that role, she trained thousands of women in sales skills and delivered motivational speeches in many parts of the US and in England. And Rosemary later returned to academia, take a position teaching developmental reading and writing in a community college. And that experience led her to Rutgers and the PhD program in literacy education. Her current goal is to defend her dissertation in early 2018 and to move on to a position that will allow her to continue her research, teach, and advocate for first-generation college students. Thank you. Okay.
Hello. Hi. Okay. Is it on the slideshow? There you go. Okay. Well, thank you for coming today. I'm very excited to be sharing my research with you. Before we start, I do want to Shelley did say some of the things that are important to me. I was in education early, and then I spent most of my career as a sales director in a cosmetics company, training women. And one thing that I learned from that experience is that I think I see people in a different way than I did when I was in academia before, because I saw them as individuals. I trained women who had 8th grade educations. I trained women who had advanced degrees. I trained women who could hardly speak any English. But what I found was if they were motivated, they could learn. And when I just got bored with that and decided I need to try something new and took a position as an adjunct at a community college, I saw my students differently, and I found that there was an kind of a understanding in the college that the students who basically flunked their placement test and were placed into my reading and writing courses, that they were, quote, not college material, and they had to be weeded out. The gatekeepers were on guard there. And I saw them as intelligent people who just didn't know how to do college, and they just needed to have guidance and learn. After about 3 weeks of my first semester, I said, you know, they're not doing this right. And some of you could probably identify, I always feel like I can do better than what's being done. So I started making suggestions, and they would just kind of chuckle, because here I was, an adjunct, hadn't been in academia in years, and I was making suggestions. So that didn't go very far. So that's how I decided, and eventually came here to the PhD program in literacy education. So I think that's kind of important that you know that about my background. And the other thing I want to share with you is, let me go back to that. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. One of my participants, who I call Luciana, all the proper names are pseudonyms. She introduced me to this quote, and she identified it as a Mexican proverb. It also has been attributed to a 20th century Greek poet, Dinos Christianopoulos, who advocated for LGBTQ people. And so regardless, I think it was really meaningful, and the more I learned about the students in my study, the more I thought that this really makes sense. And here's the problem. Between 28% and 40% of full-time first-year college students are assigned by placement tests to at least one developmental or remedial course. And if you added in community college, they get a lot of non-traditional students, older students. The percentage is much higher. 56% of African American and 45% of Latino students are required to take at least one developmental course. And the students have to pay for these courses, but they receive no credit. And taking developmental, research has shown that taking developmental courses in four-year colleges is associated with a lower chance of degree completion. So very briefly, there are volumes of research on developmental education. And, but most of them either study broad trends, percentages, what's going up, what's going down, or they focus on one specific skill or approach. They'll say, you know, I took a group of 30 developmental students and I tried this pedagogical approach on them. And research in general has produced non-conclusive mixed evidence concerning the effectiveness of developmental education in general. And some attempts that have shown some kind of success are summer bridge programs, using the developmental program in co-requisite courses, like connecting a writing course to, let's say, an intro to psych or intro to literature or something like that. And also learning communities, but not too much has been done with learning communities. Here are my research questions for this presentation. What are the literacy practices and funds of knowledge of college students assigned to developmental writing courses? How do these literacy practices and funds of knowledge relate to the students' identity, relationships, and relationships with power forces in their lives? Now, this is my #1 argument. Okay. The participants in this study are each unique individuals with their own set of talents and intelligence. Similar to most students entering college, they require guidance and specific instruction to ensure their success. The following data suggest, however, that the only firm line that separates students assigned to developmental writing, they call it basic writing, basic comp, depending on what school you're in, from those who go directly into the Composition 101 that every first-year student has to take, that's credit-bearing. The only firm line is an online standardized test of questionable validity. And the interesting thing is that different scores, different colleges accept different scores. So if you go to one college, you may have to take basic writing. You go to another college, you don't. So there's no standardization that way. Okay, my theoretical framework starts with the new literacy studies, and I want to explain literacy events and literacy practices. So a literacy event is a specific observable event of literacy. This is a literacy event. It involves reading and writing. Often now it involves technology and speech and other modalities, but it's a specific event that you can observe. Now, if you observe enough of these literacy events, then you can infer the literacy practices. So literacy practices are cultural ways of doing literacy. So when you observe enough literacy events in a particular group of people, then you can infer a lot about and generalize from the events their culture, their beliefs, their values, and their power relationships. And let's see. So in this study, we're using 3 theoretical lenses to analyze these literacy practices. So that's the reason why you study literacy practices, okay? First is Bourdieu's theory of practice with his concepts of habitus, field, symbolic capital, and symbolic power. And then there's funds of knowledge. The concept of funds of knowledge is culturally developed knowledge and skills handed down generationally for individual and collective well-being in a community. And when people take these funds of knowledge and identify themselves as part of this funds of knowledge group, then they become funds of identity. And the concept of multimodality is becoming more and more important with digital literacies. All literacies are multimodal. And I'm using right at this moment an old form of literacy. I'm speaking, but I'm also using gestures. So gestures, facial expressions, they're all different modalities, in addition to color, the type of font you use, and then significantly the new types of text that can be created digitally provide different affordances that bring about entirely new meanings. It's just not a different way to present information, but the new digital modalities create entirely new meanings, okay? And through the intersection of habitus with the acquired and inherited funds of knowledge, an individual creates a multi-layered and constantly changing identity. So that's what we're going to look at today. So Bourdieu's theory of practice, I think everybody here is probably a little bit familiar with that. The idea of habitus, one definition I found is the system of durable and transposable dispositions through which we perceive, judge, and act in the world. Something that's built into your psyche from the earliest recollections and even before that, okay? Capital. We have economic capital, we have cultural capital, which is high-paying jobs, statusy things that help you get ahead in life, and symbolic capital, which is, social capital, which is membership in groups and your standing in groups, okay? Symbolic power is a form of cultural domination that doesn't use overt force, but it's very subtle, and it has to do with manipulation, okay? And a field is a structured space like a force field, and it imposes its rules on anyone who enters. So that gives you a little review of Bourdieu's theory of practice. He also talks about something that he calls habitus clave, which is conflicts or disruptions in the participants' identities due to experiences with new intersecting fields. And he said that he experienced this himself when he moved up. He had a very modest upbringing. His parents were not educated. And then he moved up to be one of the most renowned sociologists in the world. And he said that he never really felt totally comfortable in either field. He never, when he went back to visit his family, he didn't feel comfortable there. And he didn't feel comfortable in the field that he moved into as a renowned scholar. And people who have made transnational moves, he said, can experience the same thing. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. There are people kind of caught in the middle in a painful double isolation. Okay, so multimodality. I think I already went through a lot of this. Affordances are the results of the literacy event, and digital modes open up all kinds of new affordances. And provenance is the way in which an image takes on layers of meaning as it moves from one context to another. And we do that constantly online. And on social media, likes, other reactions, emojis show emotional connections to the audience. And hashtags and reposts broaden the audience. Okay. Identities in social media. Uploading images to social media transforms the original texts into shared experience, and they develop multi-layered meanings. And the participants in social media project the identity or the persona that they want to project. And if you think about your own use of social media, you know, I know I make sure that I look good in any picture that goes on my Facebook page, right? So we all project a certain persona, a certain identity when we go on social media. So if you know a person and then you see the type of persona that they choose or don't choose to project, it tells you something about their identity conflicts and their relationships with power forces. So the methodology I am using is I used criterion sampling to select my 7 participants. My data collection so far has been 15 months. It's interesting because I keep in touch with them via text and emails, so it's really kind of still going on. I get a lot of information from texts. I did about 38 or 39 interviews. I observed them in class, outside of class, in other activities. I collected their academic documents during their first year in college, and I've been participating in social media with them for now 15 months, and also emails and texts. This is a grounded theory study, so that involves, looking for my notes, but anyway, it involves collecting, initial coding, second level of coding, which I collected some of the codes and brought them together, picked out significant themes, and then I revised it again and picked out the themes, and then I went back and checked to find data that I needed more of. And so with the grounded theory, you collect the data and you analyze at the same time. And so I was able to go back on my second, third, and fourth, and in some cases fifth interviews, and clarify things that they said earlier. Also, when you do more interviews, people become more comfortable with you and they tell you things that they didn't tell you in September, they'll tell you in December or March. So I found that very interesting and very helpful. I also, even after I was finished all my interviews, I went back and texted to make sure that I had things clarified. Okay. Now, also, this is done with an ethnographic perspective, and that means that I take into consideration culture, language, identity, and relationships with power forces, because that's one reason why you study literacy practices of marginalized groups, to bring to light relationship with the power forces that don't on an everyday basis, they don't show up. Basically because there are a lot of concepts that are just taken for granted and understood and not really clarified. And I want to tell you about my electronic media, because this was really interesting. There's not as much research on electronic media, and particularly social media is what I did. I did Facebook, and I chose Facebook and Instagram. A few of them are on other things, but I thought I had enough to bite off with those 2. And I followed them for 15 months, and I didn't really know what to do with them. So the first thing I did was I went back and cataloged every posting. I did every posting for, I believe, 3 of the participants. And a couple of them had so many posts that I would still be there today if I was trying to go back a year. But I went back a few months and got a flavor of them. And I analyzed them from, let's see, well, I can't find my notes, so I'm doing this without notes. I analyzed them in terms of whether they were original posts or reposts or not sure, because a lot of times people are really, they don't even remember whether it was an original or a repost, and you can't really tell because things move in social media. And I also classified the topic and the number of emojis and that kind of thing. And what I found, it was really interesting. Each participant had a really unique set of posts, and I didn't even, it came through so clearly to me, probably because I was triangulating that with what I know from them, from my observations and my interviews. Each set of posts on social media were very unique and really spoke to me about who the student was. For example, Daniel is very serious, and he hardly does any social media, but anything he does is political. And then Darla, who is really into puppy videos, and told me something about her, which I don't know if I'll get a chance to get into today, but very, very interesting. So then after I did that, I did a lot of reading, and I made a list of about 15 points that I could look for when I was examining selected posts, because some are just more interesting than others. And I tried that on a few, and then I shortened it and tried it on about 10 other pages. I took screenshots of the pages and did about, I guess, maybe 10 points. And then I narrowed it down to these: topic, content, author, introductory message, because that's important, shows you the purpose, why the person was posting this. Modal elements, was there a video, was it photography, was it color, and audience response, and the social and cultural norms and ideologies that were implied or naturalized in the post, and hyperlinks. I followed the hyperlinks to see where they went, and any other observations. So I did that with about 35 or 40 Facebook and Instagram pages. So now I want to introduce you to my participants and their literacy practices. So I'm not going to list all the literacy practices, obviously, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. First of all, they're primarily digital and multimodal, and they have a limited use of digital modalities in academic activities. And this is one of the first things that struck me. The students that I met, my 7 participants, are all adept at digital literacies, moving around the internet, and presentations, and how to connect a video from YouTube onto their Facebook site, et cetera, et cetera. And very little of this is being used in their classes. So I think that's significant. Outside of school, virtually all literacy is performed on phone or computer. And it was interesting because I was asking them, you know, I had this question and I had prepared it. So I asked them all, well, do you read newspapers? No. Do you send birthday cards? No. You know, mostly. And they do everything online. They have to print out their papers to hand in to some of their professors by hand. But everything outside of school, everything's online. Exceptions: Luciana, who is my artist, phenomenal artist. Some of her artwork is digital, but some of it is traditional. 2 of the participants keep a journal, a real paper and pen journal, and 3 of them send or give traditional birthday or holiday cards. Okay. So briefly, I'm going to tell you about each of these students. Ayushi is from Bangladesh. She came here at age 6. She's a student at State University. She's a poet. She's a double major, communications and criminal justice. She reads the university newspaper online, and she reads AJ Plus, which is Al Jazeera for young people, online. And she loves Khaled Hosseini's books, The Kite Runner, and the other books that he's written. All of these students, by the way, I met their first semester in college, 3 different institutions, and have been following them ever since. They were all placed into basic writing. Okay, Daniel is a child of Mexican immigrants. He's a student at State University. He has a goal of attending medical school. He spends a lot of time studying, and he reads The Atlantic and Politico online, among other things. He also loves YouTube. They all love YouTube. Darla is a European American. She's a student at Sunnyside College. She was given an IEP in elementary school. She was classified with ADHD and anxiety. She hated school. She hated college. And she was there because her family pressured her that she had to go to college, particularly her grandmother. She has a grandmother who was born in Italy, and she lived with her for most of her life. And her grandmother inspired her to go to college, but she really didn't want to be there. And after her first year, she did leave Sunnyside, and she is now attending a cosmetology school, which is what she wanted to do. She reads fashion magazines, makeup magazines, and post puppy videos for the most part, and jokes. Joaquin he came to the U.S. from Peru with his family around age 7. He's a student at Sunnyside College. He told me he was born with a computer mouse in his hand. His father always had a computer. They always played games when he was very young. His mother actually ran a community computer center for people who needed that service, and she would bring him along when she went to work. So he calls himself a serious video gamer and a tech guy, and that's his identity. He's in a program at Sunnyside College in creative arts and technology. He wants to design video games. And Luciana is a child of Dominican immigrants. Her mother was a single parent, and she sent her back to the Dominican Republic as an infant for her grandmother to care for her because she couldn't do it. She returned to the U.S. around age 4. She's a student at State University. She's a self-taught artist, lover of spoken word poetry online, a public health major with a minor in Latino studies. And Victoria is a child of immigrants. Her mother came from Italy. Her father came from Dominican Republic. And her first semester at Sunnyside College, she decided she didn't want to be there, and she transferred to John Adams State University. She's a computer science major. She says she has no time for social media. She loves to read, and she's one of the ones who sends holiday cards with personal notes on them. I think she does it for her mother. And Jerry was adopted from China by 2 European American men. They live in a middle-class community. He was a community college student for 1 semester. He's an artist. He loves video gaming. And when I met him, he told me he hoped to study video game technology. And unfortunately, he kind of got waylaid, and I don't know if that's still his goal or not. I wanted to show you this. The first interview that I did with Jerry, I did these interviews in his home because he was at a community college and I didn't have permission to go to the college. So I met him through one of my former students. And we talked for a few minutes, and he said, wait a minute. And he went into his bedroom, and he came out a few minutes later with 15 pages on legal size paper. This is a third of the first one, or one of them. And these are all sketches of characters and what they do and how they would work in a video game that he hoped to design. And he did this, I want you to know, in high school. He said it took him 1 class to design each character. So you can see he was really very engaged in his high school classes. Okay. This section is Blaming Myself, Complicity in Symbolic Violence. So the complicity is something also that Bourdieu talks about. In order for symbolic violence to work, the victims, the people who are receiving this violence, have to be complicit in it. And I saw that constantly among these students, so I want to show that to you. First one is Ayushi, and she, find my notes here. She told me that she started out in 1st grade doing very badly. Now, remember, she came from Bangladesh, and she started in school. They never put her in kindergarten. She started in 1st grade. I don't know why. And she did not speak any English. She knew the alphabet. Her mother and her aunts taught her the alphabet, but she didn't have any English to speak of. There were no ESL classes. So she said, I started out in the 1st grade doing very bad. I would get D's and C's in 1st or 2nd grade. And then, I don't know how, I went from a D to an A in 3rd grade. I don't even know how it happened. It just happened. And then I pushed her a little bit in a subsequent interview, and she said, well, you know, it might have been because I didn't know English. You think, you know? And she said that she learned English from watching TV. She watched Disney Channel and watched TV constantly, and that's how she learned to speak English. Okay, Jerry. Jerry was given extra assistance in high school because he had an IEP also. And I tracked this down in my conversations with him. And apparently he has an older sister who was also adopted from China, but she was adopted younger. And he was 2.5 or 3, his father couldn't remember exactly, when he came here from China. So he already had language in whatever language or dialect he was speaking. And that was never addressed. And what happened was they put him in school and they gave him a speech therapist. So, so he learned just from his learning from his sister and from his classmates. He said, the extra assistance, I said to him, the extra assistance, was this in high school? And he said, it was in middle school as well and in grade school. But that's only because, like my dad says, because I was speaking Chinese when I was 2 years old, and then I had to learn the basics of how to say daddy, mommy, and goodbye in English. And that was really hard for me. I couldn't do that. My dad's put me in these small classes in grade school. So I said, so you had a slow start in English? And he said, yeah, I was everything slow. And I said, and then did you always feel like you were a little bit behind? Is that it? And he said, yeah, I was really behind. Everyone knew their stuff before me. So apparently what happened was he didn't understand the language. He was given this stigma of being an IEP, a special needs student. He said he was always the extra help student, and they were always singling him out to get extra help. He didn't want the extra help. He resented it. He was embarrassed by it. And I think that his behavior, he tried to overcome this embarrassment by being the class clown. He told me that he always was the clown, the one he would make everybody laugh. And so that's why they labeled him ADHD. I don't think he was at all, but it's not my field, but that's what I think. Okay. Middle school experiences and high school. Okay, the first one is Daniel. He went to a county VOTEC, and he said, I said to him, did they push you or encourage you to go to college in high school? And he said, no. If anything, the guidance counselor encouraged me not to apply to State University. She said things like, maybe you should just go to the community college because you're top 10% of your class and you're going for free. He was actually number 7 in his class. But she didn't she told me it would be best just to go to community college. I took her advice kind of, but I didn't. I took my own initiative, I guess. I think that's really significant. I identified with that because my son was top 10% of his class. He went to Rutgers. No one would dare have said to him, I think you should just go to community college. I think that's really significant. Ayushi, she started in high school in the lowest track in English. In that remedial class, she said, I did really well. I got 97s, 98s. I wanted honors, but they wouldn't put me in honors because I was too slow. This is where I was. Then there was another class. Then there was honors. I couldn't skip that class in the middle. They said when I was a sophomore, I was going to take that class. And then if I passed that class, I could get into honors. I was like, no, that's not fair to me. So I spoke to one of my friends. He was like, I would write an email to the principal. I don't think this is fair because when you're not putting me in English honors, I feel like you're restricting me from showing what I'm really capable of. And that's not fair to me. I know I can take on the challenges, and I love a challenge, and I feel like it's going to help me grow. And then the principal said, fine, you could get in, but I had to sign a waiver form that said if I fail or anything, I can't hold the school responsible. So I signed the waiver form and I got in, and I ended up getting a B+, I think, for 3 years in high school. Okay, college experiences. The first is Joaquin, and this is a really interesting story. Joaquin is the kid from Peru. He was 7 when he came here with his parents, and he's the tech guy and the gamer. And he wanted to get into this program in technology. They have Sunnyside has a video game technology program. So he took he told me, I didn't meet Joaquin until the second semester. So the first semester, he told me he took 3 courses. They have they don't go on a credit system. It's a different kind of system. So he took developmental reading, developmental writing, developmental math, and then he took the first in the tech series that he had to take. And something happened. He never told me what it was, but he missed a lot of class, and he failed the writing and the math, but he got an A in the tech. But he said the tech course that he took, they never touched a computer. They had no syllabus. They sat around and talked, and whatever they felt like talking about, current events or whatever. And he said he never did get the point of that, and but he had to take it. He was required to take it. So the spring semester, when I was working with him, he had to take the second course, and it was called Motion for Animators. And I went to observe one of the classes, and it was in a room a large room that looked like a gym or a dance studio. It had a ballet bar across one side. And they had those mats on the floor, and they were doing, that particular day, they were doing, the professor called it improv, but it wasn't improv because they were preparing it, okay? But he was calling it improv. And the students were practicing going up and answering and actually improvising in that sense. So he said, this is going to be your final presentation for your final grade. And you need to, they got into groups and they needed to prepare, okay? So they prepared an improv and scripted it, all right? And this was going to be the final presentation. So I asked, can I come back and observe the final presentation? And he said, sure. So the night before I was getting ready to go in and observe, he texted me and said, don't bother coming. I only had one line in our skit and they eliminated my line, so don't bother coming. So after the grades were in last summer, I texted him and I said, how did you do in that Motion for Animators class? And he said, I got a C. And he said, but you know, it was my own fault because I could have worked harder at it. Do you see what I'm saying about this complicity in the symbolic violence? So then finally, he took the third course this semester. And I wasn't going to see him again, but I've been in touch with him via text. And I said, how is your third course? Are you working in computers? And he said, no, this course apparently is going to be woodworking. So he said, but it's okay, I'm required to take it, and I'm getting used to being disappointed. So later on in the semester, I emailed him again. I said, how's everything going? And are you using computers yet in that course? And I texted him. He texted back and said, everything's going great. No computers yet. No. He just said everything is going great. So I texted him twice more and said, are you using computers in your tech course? And he never replied. So that is, it's really a heartbreaker. Okay, let me tell you about Victoria. She is a student at Sunnyside, and she discovered right away that she felt that her classes at Sunnyside were too easy for her, and she wanted to transfer. And she had some friends who were going to John Adams State University, so she was going to, she transferred there. And so she also found that the Sunnyside is a private college, and she found that the difference in cost, she was going to be able to stay in the residence hall because she had been a commuter her first semester. So she was excited about that. She moved in about 3 weeks into the semester. She got a call, please come to the financial aid office. And it turns out that at Sunnyside, the financial aid people had submitted her FAFSA incorrectly as an independent student. Instead of, she's a dependent, she lives with her parents. And they used up almost all her financial aid in her first semester. And so the financial aid's office said, sorry, if you don't come up with I think it was $2,000 by next week, or you're out for the semester. And her parents, they didn't have $2,000. And so she had to pack up and move out of the residence hall. And she told me about this, and I wanted to get in there to visit with her. And then she said, she texted me a couple of weeks later, and she said her writing professor had called her and said, why don't you come in and we'll go back to the financial. She told him why she had dropped out. And he said, let's go back to the financial aid office. So he took her back to the financial aid office, and they worked out a payment plan. I think it's significant that they weren't going to do that until this professor took her back in. And so for the rest of the semester, she was working, her parents were working, and the three of them pooled every penny they had to get her through the semester. So she said, she wrote a paper about it for her writing professor, and she said, my entire freshman year has been messed up simply because I chose to go to a school that would mess up the one job they had. Okay, now I'm going to tell you about Luciana, and I'm going to share some of the social media with you. This is the fun part. Okay. Luciana is, I'm almost out of time, I realize, but I'm going to keep talking anyway. She is, she's the Dominican young lady. She's at State University. She's an artist, a lover of poetry, and a rebel. And this is a screenshot of one of the pages on her Instagram account. And it's a picture of Tupac, who she admires very much. And the original art, the rose, was done by her with acrylic paint. And then she took a line from Tupac that says, long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else even cared. And she put them together so you can really see the multimodality of this. Okay, so she has a conventional piece of art that she did. She added the words, she put it with his picture, arranged it on a table, and took a picture of it. And she designed her own original art, and the rose is a symbol of the beauty contrasting with the image of concrete, arranged with his photo. Shows her emotional connection to him, and express her own resistance to the power forces that have attempted to hold her back. In this case, reflecting her own childhood in a low-income urban neighborhood, and her rise to higher education despite the gatekeepers who are setting up obstacles all along the way. So that's what she's expressing. And her opening message, if you could, I don't know if you can read the words, but I hope nobody, I don't think anybody here is going to be offended. You all work with college students, and there's a lot of slang. Happy 46 to the GOAT, which I learned a lot, okay? Stands for greatest of all time. Your words will continue to inspire, legends live forever. She added 2 hashtags which broaden her audience and connect her post to people with similar interests and passions. She had 19 likes, which means a lot of people emotionally identified with what she wrote. And it's significant, I believe, that she doesn't use her own voice. She does this constantly. She is using the voice of a recognized spokesperson for the contemporary counterculture. And as a woman of color, she may feel that she has more power using his voice than her own. Okay, wait till you see the next one. When I first saw this, she actually now prints this on t-shirts and sells them. And of course I had to buy one. And I thought it was, you know, Adam and Eve, even the serpent, but it's not. It's from a J. Cole lyric, watch the snakes because they watching you. And I thought this really shows her identity and her feelings in a lot of ways with the snake emoji. She uses emojis, and they all use emojis a lot, and that's really a significant, it's a new modality that is part of social media and texting and other kinds of electronic communication. She didn't receive a lot of comments, but the ones she received are intense. The first 2 were from the same person, and he put in a strong arm and flames. And she replies, "Thank you." And she uses it's a smiling face with tears, okay, which is a very emotional. She uses that a lot as an emotional connection with the people who admire her artwork. So the appreciation of her audience adds depth to and extends her identity. Every time you post on social media, you're extending your identity and creating a little bit more. Okay, I will move on to the next one, which is another digital art. She has a Surface tablet, and she uses a software program called Autodesk Sketchbook. So she drew this, and in this case, she quoted one of her favorite poets that she found online on YouTube. She's really big on spoken word poetry, and this poet is Lang Leave. And she writes, "She can feel it down to her very core. This is her time. She will not only climb mountains, she will move them too." And Lang Leave is a Cambodian Chinese writer who lives in New Zealand and has become popular through social media. This is an example of how social media seamlessly connects with the local with the global. So she got 45 likes and 2 comments on that, and she used her tears emoji again and says thank you. Okay, Ayushi is the Bengali student. She's Muslim. She's an American college student, and let me show you what she does with many of her postings. This is from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and her first line up there, her entry is, "Normally I'm not a big fan of museums unless it's food related, but I genuinely fell in love with this beautiful piece of art behind me." So here's the picture. The conversation is all with one person, and she's her best friend and roommate, and she's the one who took the picture. She said, I asked her why she had selected this particular piece of art, and she said, "Like, it's beautiful. I'm just not an art person. I don't really like going to museums." She kept telling me that. But that one, I thought it stood out to me mainly because I remember this was the Arabic art section, and since I'm a Muslim, maybe I'm biased. I just gravitated towards that because it's like my home. That's why. I just love Arabic art. You know, when you go to the mosque, you know how they have these designs, and I just think they're so beautiful. She has another entry, which I didn't put in, but it's a Bengali comedian who lives in the UK. And it was really funny. It was a humorous little video that showed him trying to explain to his traditional parents that he is suffering from depression. And they're saying things like, "Oh, just go out and have fun with your friends. You'll get over it. And, you know, I'll give you some soup and you'll feel better," and that kind of thing. And it was very meaningful. And she got a lot of comments from her friends about that they could never talk to their parents about a situation like that. And she said in her comment that parents of that generation can't help it. They reflect their own culture, and many of her friends commented that they identified with the video. This is a clear example of some of her struggles with her cultural identity. She loves her university. She has pictures on Instagram and Facebook constantly smiling in every spot on campus that she can find. And she talks about how much she loves it. And despite the symbolic violence that the university has inflicted on her and the educational system throughout her educational life. And Jerry, I mentioned earlier, is a fun-loving clown on social media. He does all these silly 19-year-old guy videos of falling off bridges and acting out different kinds of jokes. And this goes along with the identity that he wants to project to cover up all the pain that he feels. And that is what I have so far. I am working on implications, but I thought maybe somebody would like to make some comments and help me out on that. Thank you for listening. If anyone has any questions or comments?
So it seems like you're really showing how this digital literacy is so rich and varied for all of these students and so important. And it made me really think about sort of like debates that I'm reading about like laptop use in the classroom, right? And like, should we allow students to have laptops and like banning laptops? And one of the big like, you know, debates that I'm seeing is sort of like this idea of like, disability accommodation and how like by like a flat out laptop ban in a classroom, it really like calls out the people that have that as a disability accommodation.
Oh, I never thought about that. Yeah.
And so thinking about these students, because you have it seems like 3 that you mentioned, right, that I either self-identify or formally identify as having a disability.
2 of them have IEPs, had IEPs in
right, and then
elementary school.
Said that they had anxiety or something, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be like, were any of these students using university disability accommodation?
Yes. So the question is the special needs students and the use of laptops, and did any of them use university accommodations? And yes, Darla was given accommodations at Sunnyside, and she had a note taker, and none of them involved laptops. But she had a traditional kind of a note taker. She could get extra time on tests and that kind of thing. Jerry insisted that he was absolutely not getting any special accommodations in the community college. And he did drop out at the end of one semester, and he said he was going back. It was a long story. He was going back this fall. And then I was told that he, quote, forgot to register this semester. So he has, there are a lot of things going on in his life anyway, but he didn't have any special accommodations. My personal opinion about laptops in the classroom, and I may change my mind about this, but I think that we are fools if we do not use the abilities that these students have and acknowledge their abilities. Just as we're trying to be culturally relevant with students of various ethnicities and cultures, well, you can look at the technological awareness and abilities of college students as a cultural fact. And we are not allowing them to use the abilities they have. In their writing class, there's at least one professor that I came across and observed who insists that they print out, I think several of them insisted that they print out their papers and hand them in physically, and then he would write comments on them by hand. The first thing is, Ayesha shared with me her papers at the end of the semester. She was glad to get rid of them, actually. And I could hardly understand his handwriting. That's one thing. Second, I'm thinking that outside of college, where do people today ever simply write a paper? In the business world, when they do a presentation, they have to do visuals, and sometimes they do videos, and they use technology in all kinds of ways, and we think we're great if we allow them to do a PowerPoint. So that's my opinion. And I know when I taught intro, I let the students bring the articles that we were writing either on paper or on their tablet or on their laptop. And if somebody is going to sit in the room and you know, go over and go through the net or look at Facebook during my class, well, I figure it's my problem because they're not engaged. Now, that is my opinion.
Yeah, thank you, Rosemary. So you started out by talking about the students being placed in remedial courses for writing, academic writing, such things. And then you show how these students bring to the situation lots of skills and understanding and motivations, right? But I'm not sure I understand the connection between this.
Yes.
Are you suggesting that students don't need to develop the academic skills, or that we leverage this stuff in some ways to develop those things?
Okay. Thank you for asking that, because I want to clarify that. The reason why I study literacy practices, the question is, what is the connection between studying literacy practices and the abilities of these students. Am I saying that academically they don't need to improve or they don't need guidance or anything? And that is absolutely not what I'm saying. The reason why I studied these literacy practices is because I want to shed light on them as, in a positive sense, the understood and taken for granted assumptions of these students is that they are not as smart as students who get right into English 101, that they don't have the ability, and we have to sit them down and do basic skills with them. That's the assumption, and I wanted to show them as intelligent individuals who have lots of abilities and talents, instead of from a deficit standpoint. So that's one point. The other is you study these literacy practices in order to understand and shed light on the struggles that they have, the symbolic violence that is heaped upon them and that they deal with, the obstacles that they come across that nobody really is paying attention to. The reason why you shed light on marginalized populations is to show the obstacles that they're coming across and the lack of understanding in society about them. So that was the point of that. I do think that this is another whole part of my dissertation, which I couldn't get into, but the way we are doing developmental writing and reading in the community college as well is not working. A lot of places, now no places that I've ever visited, but I know they exist, I read about them, a lot of colleges and universities are doing the co-curricular model. This decontextualized course, it's just like all the way through school. If you decontextualize the basic skills, it doesn't mean anything, it's not meaningful, they cannot identify with it in their lives. It's the same thing at the college level. The courses, what we're doing is not working. And instead of saying, well, let's set up this gate and only let them through if they pass through this particular course, sometimes more than one, sometimes they have to do it in math as well, is looking at them as a negative. It's weeding, looks like a weeding out process, instead of saying all of these students, I'm of the opinion that just about everybody who goes into college, with very few exceptions, needs guidance and help. And I know from teaching undergrads here at the GSE that better than 50% of my students had no idea how to write an argumentative essay. And they all went through XPOS, right? And it didn't work, apparently. So, and it was really interesting because I would say, all right, you can rewrite this first essay to get a better grade. And invariably, I would have them email me the rewritten essay. And invariably, they would say, dear professor, I hope this is what you were looking for. And at first I thought, no, I'm teaching them how to write an argumentative essay. And then I thought about it and I said, isn't that the way we all got through school? You find out what the professor wants and you give him or her what they want, right? And so this is what a literacy practice is. It's a social practice that you apply what is needed in this social situation. And I don't see how any of this vague writing transfers to anything. Did I answer your question, Drew? Okay. Yes, Keith.
I like that talk a lot.
Thank you.
Like the beginning where you framed your theoretical questions somehow. One of the things that I thought as I was going through this, maybe you have more data to back it up, but it seemed that some of the inferences that you were trying weren't, you didn't present the data that supported them, which led one to believe that maybe you were seeing what you wanted to see. So I'll give two examples. One was you said that when the student recited Tupac, she was talking about, saying somebody else say a message. Maybe because she was a student of color, she felt that she didn't have her own voice. The other was making inferences about how many people like various things. And just from my own experience with my wife playing on Facebook all the time. I'm not really sure what the flights really mean anything. So I'm not attacking you. I'm sure that I think you probably have other evidence to back this up, and you presented a lot in the 45 things that you had. What was your thinking on that?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, with the social media, I didn't have years of studies to read to get a feel for them, so I was kind of, I couldn't find anybody doing anything exactly like I was, which is good, but I read every study I could find on Facebook and Instagram and how they analyzed it, etc. And I read everything I could possibly find about analyzing electronic media and visual data, etc. And then I just came up with my analysis on my own. And of course, I checked with Cheryl McLean. She guided me a little bit with that. And as far as the making the inferences, it just comes from what I've read and other inferences that people have made from other studies.
So this is what concerns me a little bit. And as I said, perhaps my concerns in place. I don't have the data. But if you go into this believing the accounts from the literature are right, and then you use those accounts to draw inferences, it's kind of circular reasoning where you're predetermining what you're expecting to find.
Well, I'm going to go back and rethink everything. Thank you for that. I will say that Bourdieu says, and also I followed Kathy Sharmaz, who is a grounded theory scholar, and they both say that when you're analyzing your data in qualitative studies, the themes do not emerge. You decide what's important, and you decide what you're going to pursue and what you're going to go after. And so that's the attitude I had when I was collecting these data. And I did also triangulate the electronic data with my interviews, with my observations. I know these young people pretty well after about 15 months. So I was using what I learned from them from the other sources as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I just have a question about students and their identities and how they shape and sculpt them throughout their time in school. Did anyone give any type of indication, like, this is what I try to do when I'm on social media? Like, I try to have, very low profile, or, I know this is happening at home or at school, but I try to be very optimistic online.
Yes.
And and were there any interesting posts, for example, after, let's say the girl who found out that she could no longer attend school, or even once, the instructor helped her do a piano class? Were there any kind of interesting posts like after those types of big events?
So the question is the identities that they're projecting on social media, and were there interesting posts after some big events. Victoria, no, because she just couldn't be bothered with social media. But there are a lot of, I found it very interesting. For example, Luciana, the artist, she puts this persona, she projects this persona that, well, first of all, she is an artist. I admire her a lot for that. But she, this rebellious persona online, almost every post she has is, we're going to fight this, and I'm going to end up on top. And she quotes poets and she quotes the hip hop artists. And but when you talk to her, she really has a lot of fears, just like everyone else, and insecurities. And she's not. She's much more timid. Not timid, but she's much more gentle in person. So this is the persona that she's projecting. And after the presidential election last year, there were a lot of political posts, and there was a rally on campus that the immigrants, for the immigrants, and taken participation with the immigrants right after the election. And I texted Luciana and I said, "Are you going?" And she said, "I am." And I said, "Please tell me why." And on her phone, she wrote an eloquent paragraph about how important this situation was to her and why she needed to be there, and how good it felt to be surrounded by people who believed and felt as she did. And I thought, I truly cannot see any difference academically with the writing between the basic writing students and the students that I taught, you know, in Intro to Ed. So does that answer your question? It's very interesting. Jerry's another one who conveyed to me all kinds of pain and unsureness about himself, and he has no self-confidence. He's just been crushed through school, and he told me about bullying situations and how unhappy he was. But when you look at his Facebook, you would never know that. He's the Joker and the clown. Lauren.
First of all, thank you for this work and for this presentation. So you mentioned at the end of this presentation that you're still working through some of the implications.
I am.
It sounds like there's some clear implications for how we understand student identities, right? And what they're bringing into the classroom. I was wondering if you have had a chance to think about or discover, even use some of the classroom-based implications. So what does this mean for us as educators? How can teachers in a classroom space, you know, use these understandings and work through them in their pedagogy, and especially thinking about how, well, all these you studied engage with social media really actively. They did it in very different ways, right?
They
so
did.
As an educator, how do we bring this into the classroom in a way that meets all of those needs?
Well, if I had all the answers, that would be great. I would write a book right away. But the question is, how these implications, what kinds of implications does this study have for us as classroom teachers? And these are the things that have been racing through my mind for 15 months that I haven't had a chance to actually put on paper. But the one is the concept that students get placed into basic, in this case, the students I studied were, 6 of them were college students and 1 was community college. So in the 4-year situation, it's usually basic writing. And students are placed in there because of a placement test that they receive online. And Daniel, for example, who reads the Atlantic online, how many college students read the Atlantic, okay? And he likes Politico, and there were some others. And he said he was in high school and he received an email from the university saying, take this test. Write whatever. I haven't seen the test, which I think I really need to do, and I haven't done that yet. Take this test and send it back to us. And so he thought, okay, I'll get this done. And he did it between a class and his lunch break and sent it back. Didn't think anything of it. And that, I think 6 out of 7 of the participants gave me some story similar to that. And what that tells me is these are all first-generation college students. Their parents don't know anything about, they have no cultural capital in terms of getting kids into college or placement. They never said to, no one ever said to them, this placement test is important. And so they all said the same thing. I just looked at it and I thought, oh, I'm not good at taking tests, and just wrote something quick and sent it back. Or the college said, you have to get it done by tomorrow. You have no leeway. So that is one thing. The way, even if we were to keep the basic writing, I think it's going to be with us for quite a while. The way that they are placed into the class needs to be changed. As far as the students' identities and their use of social media, their use of digital skills, we need to tap into those skills more in our classes, because we're losing out. Our classes could be so much more interesting if we were to loosen up a little bit and let the students present multimodal presentations and create videos and create and things that I haven't even thought of, actually, that college students could come up with in a creative way, and they would be learning more, and it would stay with them more effectively than just sitting in a class they go to a lot of lectures, and that's a big problem too. Does that help? If anyone has any suggestions or
I'll just say, or it's a question, it's less classroom implication than institutional implication, which is, what is the connection between what the expectations are in these remedial classes and what skills they're going to be called on to use once they get, hopefully, into the credit-bearing classes. And there's like, you have to build, obviously there's a real important need to build connections between the literacies that they are using in their real lives and in this class, but also those two connections also have to connect to how they're going to use literacy once they're out of this class in the rest of college. And I'm wondering if you thought about, that.
Yes, absolutely. Trying to repeat your question now, Lisa.
Just what's the connection between the kind of literacies that they're asked to do in the class and what they're going to be doing?
Exactly. What is the connection between the literacies they use in class and what they're going to have to do for the rest of their lives?
Well, especially in college.
And in college, from the basic writing and their other college classes. The research suggests that the decontextualized basic writing class the skills do not transfer. It just doesn't transfer. It doesn't help. And as a matter of fact, there is no research that indicates that the developmental reading or writing classes are beneficial to help students get along in college. There are many different statistics, but the bottom line is, there is no study that has ever shown that a student is more likely to do well in college, higher GPA, or graduate because they had to take these developmental courses. And so that's really frightening that we continue this. And I really believe, I've thought a lot about this, and I really think it's our large institutions change very slowly. And there are all kinds of forces that are holding on to the status quo. But if we're interested in social justice, if we're interested in helping marginalized students, minority students to move ahead and use the talents and abilities that are obviously there, we need to open up and change these courses. Did I answer your question? Kind of get off sometimes.
We have one. From the webinar, it's Ruby, and she's saying, literacy education is not my field, but I have seen people in the field that deal with IEP students who have relied on standards for writing. Do you see any value in maintaining our current writing standards, perhaps as a way to use it as a measure to track improvement in students' English reading and writing? How do you assign a grade using your theoretical framework?
Boy, that's a lot of questions, and I do not have all the answers, and I'm assuming she's talking about the Common Core standards. When you accept the concept of literacy as social practice, that it's always done socially in a specific communicational situation, then you know that you need to teach the standards in that way, in context. So if a third grade child is doing a report on whales, then the child can do the report online and worry about using the Common Core standards, the writing standards at that point. Am I making sense? Okay, it has to be done specifically in the specific situation. You cannot take basic skills and take them, decontextualize them out of any situation that any student has any care about and say, all right, learn how to punctuate, or learn how to spell, or learn how to grammar. It has to be done in the context of something in which the student is engaged. That's my opinion, and that goes along with the new literacy studies that are all literacy as social practice. Okay. Well, it's 1:05, so I thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.